GOP's post-constitutional future, a new Gilded Age, question mark. And, you know, we keep hearing Republicans talk about a post-constitutional era or returning to radical constitutionalism. What are they talking about? Right? Trump uses this phrase. The Project 2025 people use this phrase to a certain extent. You hear these or variations on these phrases coming out of the mouths of the conservatives on the U.S. Supreme Court. So the question is, you know, what do they mean when they talk about this kind of stuff? What really are they saying? And to understand this, you have to realize that there have been basically two great eras, arguably three, but two great eras in America having to do with economics and society. And the first was the period from the founding of our republic until 1932. And during that time, well, really 1913, let's say, okay, the Woodrow Wilson presidency. During that time, there was no federal income tax. Yeah, Lincoln had one for 3 years during the Civil War, but that was it. So there was no federal income tax. There was no estate tax. Well, actually, that kicked in 1909. I stand, you know, let me fix that, or 1905 or 7, whatever the year was that Teddy Roosevelt got that passed. But basically, women could not vote in 1913. There was no Social Security. There was no social safety net. No Social Security, no Medicare, no food stamps, no unemployment insurance, no minimum wage. There was no right to unionize. If you tried to organize a union, very, very frequently your employers would have you murdered. Sometimes they'd hire local police to kill you. And you know, this was life. In fact, in 1900, as the President's Council of Economic Advisors noted in a 2000 annual report, quote, "To appreciate how far we've come, it's instructive to look back on what American life was like in 1900. At the turn of the century, fewer than 10% of homes had electricity. Fewer than 2% of people had telephones. An automobile was a luxury that only the wealthy could afford. Many women still sewed their own clothes and gave birth at home. Because chlorination had not yet been introduced and water filtration was rare, typhoid fever spread by contaminated water was a common affliction. 1 in 10 children died in infancy. The average life expectancy was a mere 47 years. Fewer than 14% of Americans graduated from high school. Widowhood was more common than divorce because of the dire economic consequences of two women of divorce. The average household had close to 5 members, and a fifth of all households had 7 or more. Average per capita income in $1999, now keep in mind, this is the average across the entire United States in 1900, was $4,200. The typical work week in manufacturing was about 50 hours, 20% longer than today. So basically, we had a very, very different country from the founding of the Republic up until basically the era from 1913 to 1932, basically. And then came the Republican Great Depression. And following that, Franklin Roosevelt came into office in 1933 and said, you know, we're going to change this. We're going to create a middle class. Now, America had never had a middle class that was more than half of us. It had never happened before. But Franklin Roosevelt said, I'm going to intervene in the economy. I'm going to balance the power equation between labor and management by legalizing unions. That was the Wagner Act, the National Labor Relations Act, 1935. He said, I'm going to give old people security in their old age. That was Social Security. I believe that was also passed in 1935. I'd have to go back and look. You know, he said we're going to have a minimum wage. He said we're going to outlaw child labor. He created unemployment insurance. He created a whole bunch of government programs to put people back to work. He created regulatory agencies and essentially invented the modern regulatory state. And ever since 1933, when Franklin Roosevelt did that, Republicans have been claiming that this is socialism and it's leading us straight down the road to communism. Eventually, you know, the proletariat, if the middle class ever gets too big, they're going to rise up against the rich people and pull out the guillotines, and it's going to be the French Revolution all over again, and we all know what a mess that was, and you don't want that in America. And so you get these libertarian right-wing billionaires, you know, Charles Koch and all his buddies, and yeah, I mean, there's just a whole bunch of them out there. Many of them say things like, you know, democracy is an impediment to freedom, and women should not have ever gotten the right to vote. And I mean, you know, they're unabashed, right? That not everybody should vote, you know, et cetera. And you know, but we actually amended the Constitution. I mean, following the Civil War, you had the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, but I think most notably after the Woodrow Wilson presidency, we got the 16th Amendment, which authorized the income tax, and the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. And these are things that Republicans want to roll back. They want to roll back the Supreme Court decision in 1965, Griswold versus Connecticut, that legalized birth control. Keep in mind, prior to 1965, birth control was illegal in many states, even for married couples. It wasn't until 1972 that the Supreme Court legalized birth control for unmarried women. That was also the year that women got the right to open a checking account or sign for a home or a lease or a mortgage or whatever without having to, by law, without having to have the signature of a man on that same document, be it a brother, a husband, a father, or in some cases even a son. I mean, this is how far we've come. And the Republican Party and Donald Trump want to reverse all of that stuff. That's what they're talking about when they say post-constitutionalism or radical constitutionalism, is they want to take us back to the way the Constitution was before it was amended with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. And they're dead serious about this. And they're working hard at it. And we all need to be taking them very, very seriously. These are the stakes of the election this fall. And if we don't show up, and if our friends and neighbors and relatives don't show up, we may well start down this road to completely you know, Reagan started it, right? Started trying to take apart these programs. And he was quite successful, and the Republicans on the Supreme Court as well. They've gutted so many of our protections.